Welcome again to today's webinar, What Leaders Carry Forward, Leadership Development Across Roles, Teams, and Time. We are thrilled to have you with us today for this conversation about the real impact of leadership development over time, shaped through different roles, teams, challenges, and environments. Joining us for this conversation is Greg Gould, Chief Product and Technology Officer here at Leadership Circle. As a software as a service, or SaaS, or product executive for more than 2 decades, Greg leads product, engineering, and AI strategy for Leadership Circle's platform transformation. His ability to scale organizations through product line innovation and people-centered collaborative leadership has been proven throughout his work with organizations including Uplight, Broadcom, Return Path, and now, of course, Leadership Circle. Greg first learned about Leadership Circle early in his career and joined us officially about 1.5 years ago, making him an ideal person to talk to about all of the different aspects and learnings from leadership development that leaders carry with them throughout their careers. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. It's good to see you.
Hey, Sarah. Happy to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I've just been sort of watching the chat. We got people from all over, so welcome, everyone.
So, Greg, let's start at sort of the beginning, or the beginning-ish at least, and hear a little bit about your story. I have heard you describe yourself as someone who tends to step into roles during moments of change and transition. And so maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about what kind of leadership that environment actually requires. What is it that you're stepping into when you step into those situations?
Yeah, great. You're probably always stepping into a pretty large level of uncertainty. Frequently, you're stepping into some amount of organizational chaos. You can be stepping into teams that are, not well aligned with the rest of the business. I definitely have led through a number of changes where product is at some kind of a transformational mode in the organization. And so, it's not uncommon for leadership and strategy to shift in one direction and product and tech not really to be ready for that move. And I've come into that place a couple of different times now in very different ways. So you're always stepping into something a little bit different, a little bit messy. One of the things that you have to be able to do is take on information really quickly, but also be willing to lead. Without perfect information, I am definitely someone that is very comfortable making a decision, setting a direction, and learning from mistakes rather than not making a decision. So I don't know. It's sort of how I'm wired, is to come into those situations and be ready to absorb a lot of information quickly and not make rash decisions, but not spend too much time sitting around trying to understand, all the possible angles, because you can't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just the way that you're describing that, it doesn't sound too different from virtually every position people can step into, especially these days, right? With so much changing all around us all the time, and so much, maybe not necessarily instability, but just transition and change and complexity. So it sounds like it's a pretty relatable experience to be stepping into those positions.
Yeah, it's, the scale and the circumstance has varied a lot, but I especially think that with kind of what you're seeing in the world now, both in tech and culture, I think like that, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the VUCA, the high volatility and uncertainty, it's more and more. I've always just been wired for it, I guess.
Nice. Well, so then maybe you can tell us a little bit about, was it, one of these roles, these transitional or changing roles, where you first encountered the idea of leadership development? I remember you mentioned talking about being in a retreat or a workshop thinking, what the heck am I doing here? Like, was that one of these moments?
Yeah, I've been lucky in my career. I spent about 9 years at a company called Return Path, and that was a company that really valued professional development. And so In terms of skills development, even manager training early in my career, a lot of investment in product management skilling, and technology skills. Had really good consistent exposure to that. So development was fortunately always part of the environments that I'd been in. Um, but it was 2017. I went to CA. I joined a public company, but in a business unit in an innovation role, doing something different. A time of a lot of transformation. The company that I had stepped into had recently been acquired. We didn't know we were about to be acquired again by Broadcom, which was another massive change that no one saw coming. But it was like in that moment when I stepped into that, and that was the first time I had stepped into a VP role where I hadn't grown into it in that company. So I had developed, I spent 9 years at the prior company and had grown into that role. And sort of when you grow into a leadership role in the company that you're in, it looks one way. When you come in from the outside and it's like, here's someone new and he's now a VP and he's in charge of this area that didn't exist before. And by the way, all the leaders that you knew left the company because we're about a year and a half post acquisition, and this is a new guy that's taking, and so that was all happening. And yeah, it wasn't a retreat. It was a workshop. And it was actually I don't know that Amy, our head of North America, is on the call, but she was in fact one of the two coaches that led this workshop, and it was admittedly a lot of feelings, and a lot of like learning about ourselves and people that I'd never met before crying. And I definitely had a moment. It was a lot of vulnerability, and it was like really valuable. But it was. I'm not. I'm not exaggerating when I say I think I've been in the company for less than a week, and I was like, "Your job is to build new products and launch new things, and here's your budget." And it's like, "Oh, but over here we're crying." And it was like, okay, it was a very interesting experience, but it was also kind of eye-opening to like start talking about you know, how we develop as leaders and how that relates to how we develop as people and what all that looks like. And not just skills development and not just how to be a manager, but like, how to be human and how to be a leader. And it was different. It was definitely a moment of like, huh, what have I done? And also it became, much, much more interesting to me.
Well, there are a couple of things about what you just said that I think are really interesting. One is that drawing a differentiation between sort of the professional, the skill, the technical development, and then these, like leadership development, which is a different set of skills. And then also this idea that, oh, developing leadership is also developing as a human. I know we talk about that at Leadership Circle, but that is an interesting realization, I'm sure, to have in the midst of it while people are crying around you or while there's a lot of emotions going around.
Yeah, it was, I had, I the technical skills, the professional skills, I had them. You always need to be developing them. I'm still always developing them. But it was a very different look at like, oh, the things that we're talking about in this meeting are not just like everyone here is smart, everyone here knows how to do the job. And what it really was, to set a little bit of context, is like I said, there was a lot of change. There was a lot of turnover. I was coming in from the outside, but there were also several people that were inside this organization that were being elevated into first-time leadership roles as this leadership turnover was happening. So it was actually the prior general manager who was leaving. It was part of her preparing like this next wave of leaders to kind of take on that area of the business. So it was really, it was this pretty great thing that she was doing for all of us, but I didn't really know what was going on when I got into it. And it definitely was. I remember coming home and like telling my wife, and I was like, okay, this was like therapy. Like, I don't know, and it is. And a lot of the things that you do learn in leadership, and look, it can be the LCP, it can be any number of other assessments. Like a lot of these things that you look at are not, they're about leadership, but they are definitely a lot about things of like who you are as a human and how you show up in the world and how that affects your ability to lead and work with teams, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so okay. So was this exposure to the Leadership Circle profile, or was it just kind of general
It
leadership?
was it was the thing that led to that. It was the stepping stone into that. It was a group of emerging leaders coming together and getting some really good coaching, and by the way, I've maintained relationships with, there were two coaches that were part of it, and I'm still very close with both of them. I work with one of them, and one of them is my coach to this day. Um, Pretty important experience, and also a lot of lifelong relationships formed. But yeah, it was coming out of that, because this was like a group thing, and I don't know, it was 3 or 4 days, and we learned a lot, and we may have started to learn a little bit of creative reactive, but it wasn't like deep, we're going into the LCP here. It was like, this was like some foundational skills for what it means to show up as a leader and dealing with change and all the transitions that were happening. But one of the follow-ons from that became me getting engaged with a coach for our first time. And as part of that, that's when I first got exposed to the LCP.
Got it. So let's talk about that then a little bit. The when you took your first LCP, which is of course our leadership circle's primary leadership development assessment. Um, one of the surprising things about, I'll just speak for myself, when I took the LCP, was really not just being a self-assessment, but of getting feedback from other people. So what was the experience like for you of getting feedback from folks who were so new to you, and to whom you were so new? And was it even valuable? What did you learn?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So like I said, when I was at a company called Return Path for about 9 years, a lot of professional development, a good focus on people development as well. Um, and so it was not my first exposure to 360. I had actually had 360s going on throughout my career. Now, not much more kind of typical like performance review, peer performance review. Here's a couple of boxes. How to So it wasn't the first time that I experienced uh, you know like peer feedback. It was definitely, though, the first time that I encountered something that had the breadth of feedback, being asked to not just do your own assessment, not just have peers, but your boss and your boss's boss and direct reports. It was a very different thing to sort of look across all of those levels of your circle and your organization. And the one thing I will note is, by the time that I did it, and I think this is actually important for my experience with it, you know, I was new, but it was like, okay, so I mean, when I talk about the development workshop that we did, that was literally like my first or second week in the job. It was a few months of actually engaging with a coach and sort of learning the role and navigating the org before we did the LCP, which is kind of important. I mean, just from my own personal experience, I've done them 3 times. Once I did it too soon after joining the org, and there was a specific reason for it, but it does matter. Like, you can't go in cold on day one and say, tell me what you think about me. That doesn't work. But I did have exposure to the 360 concept, but this was a completely different animal. I've always told people, people on my team, even here now, that have taken it. We'll talk about this, but I did have a team at my last company that I did put through it as well. And like, I honestly described it as, the first time you do it, it's kind of a gut punch. Like, not, and that sounds bad. I don't mean to say it's like, oh, it's a thing you want to avoid. But it definitely sort of, like, it hit it for me. It personally hit very hard, because it was like, oh, all of these things that I sort of know about myself, or think I know about myself, but I think no one else knows about me. It's like, oh, no, that's, you're carrying all that around with you. So it was pretty eye-opening that way.
That seems to be a common theme. We hear a lot about people's first experience with the LCP and it being eye-opening and quite revealing, and in many cases transformative, magical, just that it's like, oh my gosh, this is a moment in time that we're seeing, and this is really what people are seeing. This is really how people are experiencing me. So what did you do with that insight? You get this insight like, oh wow, all these things that I thought I knew but nobody else knew, turns out everybody knows. What do you do with that?
Yeah, so a lot, and maybe a little bit of crying. No, definitely, it was definitely one of those things. I read it, internalized it, reread it a bunch of times, but also I was lucky. I was someplace where I was doing this in partnership with having a coach, right? And so it's great to go through the LCP experience and to do the debrief and to come up with your development plan. But I also had someone that was sort of like partnering with me on an ongoing basis beyond that, right? So it was I would tell people this as like a peer that's going to take one, or if I, telling, not, on how coaches use it, or, any leader consuming it. Like, you can only spend so much time trying to consume the whole thing and be like, okay, I'm going to fix all of these scores. So I like, here's this, this big circled graph, and here's like all of these different metrics about you in 29 dimensions. Um, and you can't look at it and say like, here's everything that's broken, right? I mean, that is sort of an initial reaction. Especially for someone, like me, who's is very achievement oriented, very, used to being, I had gotten to this place, I was newly a VP in a large public company. I mean, this was like a role I had worked for like a long time. And then it's like, oh, I went from feeling like I'm great, I've got this thing, to like, oh, I'm not. But it becomes about, picking the things that matter. Like, when you go through the feedback and you go through, all of the different things you learn about yourself. I mean, you can't focus on trying to move the needle on 29 things all at once. And you also can't look at it and say, well, I'm going to totally fix this thing over here, and not lean into the things that you're actually doing well, right? Because some of it is like, hey, this, it wasn't all like, oh, terrible. But it was a learning moment. And it definitely became something about like, this is the advice I'd give anyone, but it was like, okay. And look, like I said, I had a fantastic coach who was kind of guiding me through this, but it's like, okay, what do you want to do with this? Like, what are the things that you're going to sort of say, putting this on the shelf for now, because it's like a product backlog. I can't do everything. But what are the one or two things that I feel like are going to be the highest impact, are going to be the highest ROI? What are the things that like really stood out in the feedback, and saying like, okay, if I can turn that one thing, like this thing is close, but if I can turn the corner on this one thing. So it became like very much about picking a couple of specifics.
So can you talk a little bit about your experience of partnering with a coach? I mean, and because this is not exclusive to the LCP. This is, with any kind of assessment that people do, or learning, or leadership development that people do. Partnering with a coach is often something that happens. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of doing that, how that helps, how that challenges you?
Yeah, and yes, and I'm gonna say I'm a little bit spoiled, because so it's 2026 now. And I've, since 2017, most of my time, in a number of, three significant roles during that time, I've had a coach during that time. So for me, it's sort of become this thing that it's like, I honestly don't know how I would do what I do without it. But which obviously I know not everyone, I've been lucky. I've been in organizations that have valued that and been willing to spend on it. There was a gap time that I didn't, and I did it myself. It's like anything else. It's a thought partner, someone that challenges you, someone that will call your BS, but in a very, like, I think one thing to be aware of, and I'm sure most people on this call know, like, there's a big difference between your coach and your therapist, and it's very easy to like cross those lines, but it's not that, right? Like, it's someone that can really sort of hold you to like, okay, how is this impacting how you're showing up in this way, in this context, right? So to me, it's like, it's because it's not just a point in time thing. I mean, the assessment is a point in time thing. Our assessment is a point in time thing. Other assessments are point in time things. They're super valuable tools, but using those in partnership with a coach, someone that can also, whether they're pointing out something in the LCP or DISC or whatever, someone that can, like, as you're getting caught up in your stuff, sometimes it's good for them to just be the sounding board that's like, this sounds a lot like this other thing. And you're like, oh, crap. Yep, it is.
Yeah, just that extra perspective, right? That outside perspective, because I know for me, it can be easy to get lost in the sauce. And so having someone to bounce ideas off of, someone to kind of pull you out of your spin if you're going spinning, or to help you prioritize. Does that, I'm sure that enters into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's just, look, I have it as a checkpoint where it's every 2 to 4 weeks at most that I check in with someone. And it is, it's sort of that objective person that knows these dimensions about you that can, let you spin when you need to spin, but pull you up. When it's like, okay, well, now this is not serving you, this pattern is not serving you. So what do you want to do about it? What have we done before? How does this thing look like this thing?
I love that. Maybe also while we're talking about coaches, just because having that support is certainly a handy assist for any kind of leadership development or development work that you're doing. Have you found a combination of tools and support that has really made a difference for you, whether that's the LCP and something else or other assessments?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're all a little bit situational. I mean, I've done the LCP 3 times now, and if you look at my LinkedIn, you can see I've had 3 major role and organization changes in the last 9 years. 9 years? Yeah, 9 years. Um, and every time I've stepped into a new role of significance, I've done an LCP. Um, and so, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily the only tool for that time, but I do think that having that as a snapshot for how you, like we started off talking about, like I jump into these high stress, high change, high impact situations. And so it's very interesting to see how those patterns change over time with the experience that you've gained and the and the tools you've picked up along the way. I've definitely worked with teams using other things, using Working Genius, using Disc. They kind of all have their purposes, and certainly different for teams and individuals. But for me, the sort of walking into these high pressure, high change, high profile leadership roles, the LCP as a snapshot, because and I think in this, 99% of this conversation is not going to be about product and technology that we're building at Leadership Circle. This will be my one shameless plug for the stuff that we're doing. Is one of the things that we're really investing in right now is developing the ability to really look at how these things map over time and change over time with the context that moves with you. On a personal level, I think that's incredibly valuable. Is because there are certain things about you that are not going to change. And if I can look at my profiles, I can look at my scores, and it's like these are the ones that are kind of constant. And then there are other things that I can look at and point to. And again, it's a combination of coaching. It's not just taking the assessment and off you go. And it's a combination of coaching and sort of like coaching for training for a marathon or anything else. So like you can't. It's not just set it and forget it, right? It's like continuous work, and like you got to work on those things over time. But I do think that there are things that you can there's muscles you can very intentionally develop, and there's things about you that are just going to be this is what you look like, this is who you are, and you need to figure out how do you lean into those things in the right ways.
I do want to ask you actually about your personal experience of taking it over 3 times, over the course of 3 different positions and three times, what things were constant and what things were changeable for you. But we do have a question in the chat real quick that I just want to get taken care of. And Miriam is asking if each time you stepped into a new role and completed the LCP, was this the full LCP or the self-assessment?
Full LCP. Full, not the self. I mean, the self-assessment is a super interesting way to step into it and to get your view of it. But it's how you perceive yourself, and the big value, and this is really not meant to be a plug, but the big value is actually seeing how you show up and how others are perceiving you in the moment versus how you're perceiving yourself is just incredibly valuable, especially in stepping into those new roles, high complexity, high change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so you have mentioned this a few times now. You've taken the LCP three different times. Um, what about you? What did you notice or what stood out to you about like what did change specifically, or what
Yeah.
didn't change, or maybe which is more interesting?
Yeah, and I mentioned to you before we hopped on with all these nice folks here. I did actually. I've gone back now and looked at them again. Some of them are a fun trip down memory lane, and some of them are a little bit rough to go back and look at, like, where was I as a leader 9 years ago. I mean, I think it's, if you really think about, you know, how we talk about like the creative reactive move and the reactive to creative shift and what it looks like. The first time I took it, and like I said, I had grown into, I was a VP in an innovation group in a big company. I'd moved on from a very successful run where I really grew my career. And then I stepped into this thing from the outside. And you're going in and everything is like, I need to prove, this is a new role, not just a new role to me. This was a new role created inside the company, right? Like, we need to have this innovation role, and we need to do things in different ways, and we're going to hire this guy from the outside that's done this before. And you're like, I've earned my spot. And so the first time I took it, a lot showed up very reactive, right? I was spending a lot of time, protecting. I was spending a lot of time trying to assert that I was as smart as, why I got the job. So if I look at myself, the protecting and complying tendencies are, or sorry, not complying, the protecting and arrogant, yeah, very opposite of complying. But I definitely, I tend to go there. Um, and that stuff was really showing up. Like, I had stepped into this new role. I had stepped into a level of leadership that I'd never been in before. So certain behaviors and certain patterns that worked for me in a place that I grew into a leadership role where I knew people and had relationships that formed over years, like, those things weren't okay. Um, and it was, this is where the gut punch, kind of came in, was like, oh yeah, people see this thing about me. And a lot of it was like, okay, make space, right? Everyone gets that you're smart. You were hired because you were smart. You were hired because you've got a track record of achieving results. Um, you've got the thing, right? I mean, I don't know how many times you coach this to an individual or an organization, right? The behaviors and process and way of working that got you here is not necessarily the thing that gets you there. I mean, it 100% showed up on paper or on a report. I literally have it here on my screen. I don't really want to look at it right now, but it absolutely, it was definitely, this was like a profile of someone who was stepping into leadership and had a lot of doubt and a lot of trying to, assert that they were, good enough. And that became a lot of sort of where the coaching was, right? And what we worked on, which is like, okay, how do you now start to, how do you start to actually get results out of others? How do you start to get people excited about your vision and not just running them over with it, right? And that was like, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that, but that was sort of at the core of it, was, all this was coming at you all the time because I had a lot that I thought to prove.
Mhm. Well, and you're just hitting on the head on something that I think is really interesting that I want to make sure we talk about, which is um, moving. At some point you move beyond just yourself, right? And so it's becomes about, all right, well, how do I galvanize the people around me? How do I inspire the people around me, or get us all working together, rowing in the same direction? And that also applies to development. So when you started working on that, or realizing the things that you wanted to work on, or identifying the the growth edge for yourself, in then inspiring and getting your team going, did leadership development for the team enter into that at all?
It did. It didn't in that role. So yeah. So just to sort of fast forward. I mean, the CA Broadcom time was a pretty fascinating growth time. I mean, CA was a massive software company that had been around since the 70s. Probably it was pretty large enterprise player. And then in 2018, end of 2018, beginning of 19, we were acquired by Broadcom. Broadcom, who's now one of the largest like market cap companies in the world. But it was Broadcom was a semiconductor business. No one understood why they were getting into the software business. So we went through this massive, massive, massive change. My role bounced all over the place 3 times or 4 times. Um, but it was a great sort of learning experience, actually being able to guide an organization through that. Um, but it was really when I moved into my next role that I started to think about this as more of a tool for not just for me, and there were others in the organization that were also sort of on the same course that I was and leveraging it. We weren't doing like in a systematic way. There were a handful of us that were working with coaches and working with development on our development that way. When I went to the next company, uh, first time I had a role with a C in front of it, which is like another big moment. Like, okay, if you thought you were sort of a big deal because you made it to this role over here, now this is a completely different animal. And so there was both what I did in my own development in that time and sort of what changed, and we could talk about that. But it was also this was the first time in my career that I had several layers of leadership below me, right? So I was leading a company through a lot of change, a lot of challenges, a lot of emergent situations, a lot of organizational friction. You could describe, a lot of times it always felt like, the patient was on the table. It was always something was on fire. Um, and so, in addition to myself being in that role at that level for the first time in my career, I also had a team of 5 really strong leaders that were stepping into new levels of leadership in their own career, while we were really trying to transform this company that was, pretty challenged. And that's where it was both sort of, okay, what is the LCP and what does my coach tell me about where I am now? But also that was the first time I made it a point to like, okay, how do I bring this in for my team and how do I elevate them as leaders, seeing what they're going through and knowing like my own experience with going through that level of leadership change.
Yeah. Can you talk about maybe a specific team situation where, helping people understand the way they show up as leaders and how they are as leaders maybe shifted how the team worked together as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing you said is what actually matters is that, you know, it was how the team worked together. So, there's the concept of who's your first team. But when you're in a company, especially of that size, of that scale, I mean, my product organization was probably 40 to 50 people at times. Product engine, development. So parallel organization was 350 or more. This was a big organization, a lot of companies that had been rolled up, put together, and some pretty specific challenges. And so that was actually one of the first things was we needed to figure out what the structure was for the product lines that we had. We needed to, each of these things, we had multiple product lines. They all had their own roadmaps, their own business goals, and we had goals as a business, and we had goals of how the whole roadmap come together. And so figuring out everyone's individual leadership strengths, just like you figure out, hey, someone here is really great, at technology, and someone here is really good at business strategy. Like it was really important to actually get my leadership team working as a team. Like we love to say leadership team. I hear leadership team get, it's said all the time. I've seen a lot of leadership teams that are not actually teams. They're different leaders that sort of are at a peer level in the organization, but they don't necessarily work together effectively as a team. And that was kind of the key thing. And it stayed a tough situation. There were always a lot of challenges that were coming at us, but we did a lot of work, both, and I, engaged with my coach. Well, I was say at the time that she's still my coach, but to work with that team. And it was around, you know, getting, individual LCPs for everyone and individual coaching for everyone, so everyone can work on their own stuff in terms of stepping into that level of leadership. But it enabled us to actually work on how do we work together as a team if everyone could kind of get through some of their own stuff individually, and we could put it out there with some levels of transparency, right? Because when you start to realize, it's one thing to say, I want, okay, you're really good at strategy and you're really good at execution and planning. But when you also start to see how different leaders show up in different ways, and actually start to think about how did we leverage each other in that way too, we actually really started to lead as a team, which was really necessary.
I love that. I mean, I know it's cliche, but it just makes me think of that phrase, a rising tide raises all boats, lifts all boats, when each individual leader is working on their own stuff and stepping more fully into their creative leadership, then you understand better how the group works together. The group can work together better, and suddenly things are maybe not suddenly, but things may be moving in the right direction.
Yes, I was to say it's not none of it's sudden.
Yeah,
This stuff is all a journey.
um, okay, we've got maybe 10 or 11 minutes before I want to jump into a Q&A section, and we've got a couple of really juicy questions, popping up in the chat. So we've got some good things to ask. But before we do all that, I do just want to check in with you about, these other tools, right? And because it's not just the LCP, there's lots of things out there that do this. So maybe speaking a little bit more generally about leadership development tools and support and resources that are out there. How do you see this moving, and or what makes a tool sticky? What makes it something that you can carry through multiple organizations and roles or times of your professional life? What do you think actually makes these? Because you've used a lot of them. You mentioned DISC already. We know you've done LCP and a bunch of things. So what makes something effective rather than just sort of be a one and done tool that you're like, oh, all right, that was interesting, and now we'll never think of it again?
That is a good question. I will say the only tool that I have used consistently across roles like this and across organizations like this has been the LCP. But I think they're situational. I mean, like I said, the two that stuck out to me in terms of other work that we did, and I'm not going to position myself as an expert on any of these because it's been a minute. We did disc work. We did disc work of leaders. That was with the executive team at my last company. I think the thing with any of these tools is, getting, and this was in a team context, right? Is getting people on the same page, speaking the same language, using the same framework for how we think about these things. So, look, we have a team tool. We have Bright. I have used Bright with my own team. I think there's a lot of value in team tools, and in terms of like whichever one it is, the one that actually starts to get you to look at how use the same language, use the same framework, so you're all thinking about how does the unit work together. We've had really good success working with Bright. The last year is the first time I've used that. The disc work of leaders was great. It enabled us in my last company to say, oh wow, we have an entire executive team that's all clustered here. Like we have like 80% of us in the disc case were all Ds. We were great at making decisions and running after things and going and getting stuff done. We could be really bad collectively in terms of making sure that we communicated down to everyone that didn't necessarily process information the same way that we did. So when I think about using anything from a team perspective, which it's really about, okay, look, and it is kind of like the LCP. I mean, and looking at the different dimensions, it's like, okay, you have to think about all of these things. Being really good over here doesn't mean you can't, you're allowed to like not think about this thing over here at all. And so for me, having a tool with a visual framework that people can align on and understand, that's valuable. I can't really speak to which ones are necessarily more valid than other. I just think there's a lot of value in bringing these things in the right moment, whether it's for your individual development, um, or for teams. And I'm a big believer in using them for teams as well.
I love that. Is there a time that comes to mind for you, just thinking about your experiences that you've shared even with us today, or others that maybe haven't come up yet, where the insight from coaching or from seeing your profile, seeing what patterns pop, kind of for you that you recognize or that are surprise to you, where that insight has helped you shift out of maybe reacting, in a reactive way, or acting, behaving in a reactive way when you would have. Does that question make sense? Has it helped you maybe make a different decision in a high pressure situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I will come back to the fact that the LCP has been, my go-to tool along with coaching for a while.
Mm.
There are certain things that I just know going into a situation that I just have an awareness of. Look, even before this call, Sarah, I told you your job was to keep me on task and on time, right?
Right.
Because
Yep.
I know, and I've known for many years now, and I've seen it in the data and I've seen it in the feedback. I can talk through and over people, and when I get on a topic, I can go and own that to the point that it's not helpful for everyone else in the room. So that's like a small little thing that I do every day.
Yeah.
Like, there's not too many meetings that I'll get into where I don't tell someone your job is to make sure that I'm not talking too much. And if I haven't told someone that, it's probably not going to be a great meeting. So it's like a little thing, but there are a lot of like little habits that I've picked up over time that I do think are pieces and parts of incorporating this work.
Yeah. I think that's really important to bring up, because the tendency can be to assume that leadership development means some sort of massive change, huge shift, some revelatory, information that you learn, when often it is those kind of micro things that you notice, oh man, that happens in every meeting. I should pay attention to that a little more. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really smart. Okay, one other question before I get to kind of the big juicy ones to finish us up. Um, how has leadership development influenced the way you communicate and build trust? I mean, you just mentioned,
Yeah.
this one example here, but I'm thinking maybe a little more broadly.
Um. Yeah. I mean, I think it's along the same lines. One of the things that I've learned, and it kind of goes back to where we started. Stepping into high change, high stress. You know, big roles over the years where you have to make decisions quickly. And I am wired to do that. And I am always happy to come in and digest information quickly and get to a point of view when I have to. But one of the things that I've really had to learn consistently through the LCP and through coaching and through other tools is everyone processes information in different ways. Everyone processes information at different speeds. Um, and making space for that is really important. It's like, why did I invest in having my team of VPs do the LCP and do their own development? Because you learn, you reach that place where it's not an individual sport anymore. Like, being a great leader is not about getting the best results out of yourself. Like, no one's putting your report card on the fridge. You're not getting a star. It's not about what you did, right? It's about getting performance and getting achievement out of others. And being the smartest one in the room all the time with all that information and just jamming it at people isn't the way to do that. Even, look, there are plenty of times that I form a perspective and I have an idea that is roughly the right idea off the bat. And there are also plenty of times where the initial impression and the idea that I have is wrong. And if you don't make space for that, and that's been a big learning, like, it doesn't all have to come from me.
And that might be the answer to this next question I'm going to ask. So if it is, we can just move right along. But just thinking back across your career and the experiences you've shared with us today, like where do you see the greatest long-term impact of leadership development on your own work? Whether that's in yourself or in your
Yeah, I think it is that. I think it is getting to a place where you're comfortable being like, I don't have to be the smartest one in the room all the time.
yeah.
I have to know who the smartest one in the room is, right? And it's okay if it's not me. Um, I think that's just you know, um, you have to learn to trust other people and let them do the work and let them make decisions and guide them. And there's absolutely, plenty of times and places where I make the decision, I make the call, and I drive us in a direction. But you get to be an effective leader by building effective teams. This wasn't really meant to be a talk on teams, but that's been one of the biggest things for me is I've always felt really strongly that the thing that I do great and the thing that I really enjoy and thrive in is really having a high impact team. Um, and so learning to do that has been, the big change for me.
Excellent. Okay, this has been really rich, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing your experiences and insights with us. And we do have some questions that have come in via chat and message, so I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for that. So here's the first one. This is a pretty juicy one, I think, from Bryant. So many times, good leaders or performers need the right environment around them to be successful. Does the LCP or does Leadership Circle provide insight into whether the problem is you, the person being assessed, or whether you're in the wrong organization? Maybe. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as I say, I don't know that I'm the one to answer, like, is the LCP meant to decipher that?
Mm.
I can say, so I will give. I am not going to give the what our much smarter than me research and assessment team would tell everyone about, what it does and doesn't show you. But I think that looking at the LCP and looking at and working with a coach, which I like do believe that they go very hand in hand. I think there's a natural place where you start to, look at these things and say, are these things true? Are these things true? Are these things true? Right. So I don't think it's explicitly like what the LCP will tell you. I'm sure someone inside LC probably has a perspective on that, but I think if you start to understand yourself well enough and you understand what your leadership looks like, I think you'll probably start to understand if you're in the right place or not. But that's purely my opinion.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay, here's another one. If someone is earlier in their leadership journey, early in their career, what would you want them? What would you think is maybe important for them to understand about how leadership development actually works?
I think it goes actually back to the comment you made a couple of minutes ago. One, it is a journey, right? There's no one assessment, there's no one test, there's no one skills training, and voila, you're a leader. It doesn't work that way. But the other thing is yeah, sometimes it's not like these big massive breakthroughs. It is a series of small changes over time that you take with you,
Yeah.
and they're situational. Like, not everything that works in one place works in the next, right? Which is also why it's fluid, and it's about having a toolkit and knowing yourself.
Excellent. Okay. Manuel asks, in addition to sharing your own learnings and journey with others, do you have an example around how you keep the LCP framework and conversation going when not all team members have been exposed to the LCP or even taken a 360-degree journey? He's saying that he's been recommending the self-assessment to those who are interested in learning more, but is wondering, do you have an example or a story?
Mm, I mean, absolutely. I'd recommend, like, if people want to understand it, the free self-assessment, which you can use as a first step to just kind of understand creative reactive, is super helpful. Um, like, personally, I don't tend to talk to other people in terms of frameworks, but it's, for me, it's much more of just like an ongoing sort of organic conversation around like, here's an example of a thing that's worked for me, or here's a thing that, I've probably had plenty of conversations with people that I have coached. And when I say coached, like people that have worked for me that I've mentored and, grown in their careers, where I've said, okay, well, here's an example of, how, just asking the question, like, how did you show up there? What was your part? And, so I think there are things that you can learn from it that you can bring into conversations with other, where it's not like, I'm just going to drop this framework on you. That's not for me to do.
Okay, Shraddha's got a great question for you about coaching. And this is, what is it that leaders at your level most value in leadership and executive coaches?
Um, so I'm very fortunate that I have one that I've developed a relationship with over many years, right? Because it is a relationship, right? For me, it's never been a transactional thing. Like, here's just the engagement. I mean, look, there are times that I've ended with one coach and started with another, but I do think that like, I actually value having someone that I do have a relationship with, that knows, that to an extent can read me, and can go, we start a meeting, we start a conversation, and it's pretty quick for her to get a read on where I am and what's sort of needed in that. And it's like, you just need that person that doesn't work for you, that you don't work for, that can hold you accountable. And that can also know when, like, hey, maybe today's the day, not the day for it. So I value someone where it is, look, it is a professional relationship, but it is a very trusted relationship.
Excellent. Okay, I think this might be maybe one or two additional questions. In moments of pressure or uncertainty, what leadership practices or tactics from your leadership development do you find yourself returning to most often?
Say it one more time.
Sure. In in moments of pressure or uncertainty, these high, or just highly decision making, in times of pressure or uncertainty, what leadership practices or tactics from your coaching or leadership development journey do you find yourself returning to? What do you look to? What are some of the, maybe some of the tools in the toolkit that aren't the assessments, but the things
Yeah.
the assessments have taught you, that you can return to?
Yeah, I think there's, you know, a couple of things that we've talked about that we've mentioned them a couple of times, but they are sort of, they're very important to me, right? Is learning, you know, is learning when I need to trust myself and when I need to elevate the team. I think that's a big thing, because there's a lot of times where in a really complex situation, um, the answer doesn't just sit with me. And when pressure is coming at you, it can feel very natural to say the pressure's on me, so I have to release the pressure. I'm going to go solve the problem. So for me, there's always been that moment of, when does this need to come from me? When am I best served actually, like, taking a breath, taking a minute and saying, like, I need to work on this with the team. Like, we are going to collectively solve this. Um, and I think that was one of those things, like, early in my career, I always had to solve it, you know?
Yeah. Okay, well, we've only got about 4 minutes left to the top of the hour, so I think it's time to kind of wrap up and wind things down a little bit. And maybe, I don't know, Greg, if you have any kind of final words or a final thought on this, about, in your experience, what does real leadership development look like over time? What do you think leaders carry forward when it comes to leadership development?
Yeah, I think, look, I think the biggest thing is leadership development over time is, well, leadership development is a thing that happens over time, right? Leadership development and leadership development over time are not two different things. There's only one version of leadership development. It happens over time. Um, there are tools like the LCP that are extraordinarily helpful in it. There are resources and people like coaches that are, massive multipliers in partaking in it. Um, but you don't actually have to have either of those things to develop as a leader if you make it a focus and you make it a choice. There's a lot of other resources available. Those are great ones when they fit your budget and they fit your time. But leadership development is just like, it's a thing you have to make a decision to invest in, and then that can look a lot of ways. And it is an ongoing thing.
Excellent. Well, thank you for saying it in such a great way. And thank all of you for joining us in this conversation. If you want to learn more about Leadership Circle coaching or assessments, or you just wanted to have a conversation about what leadership development might look like for you or for your team or your organization, let us know. You can type yes in the chat and we'll follow up with you directly, or visit our contact page on the website and reach out whenever you're ready. In the meantime, I invite you to join us next month for a conversation on the hidden impact leaders have on teams. We talked a lot about teams today, kind of unexpectedly, but we're going to dive into what it means when leaders bring the weather with Tyson Andrus, one of the principals here at Leadership Circle, and discuss the influence intentionally and unintentionally that leaders have on those around them. Watch your inbox and Leadership Circle socials for details about that. Final thoughts. As soon as I'm done talking, we're going to go ahead and close out this Zoom call. So I just want to say thanks again. Remember that we've been recording, and in about a week or so, you'll get an email with a link to the recording, as well as a summary of key takeaways and insights from today's conversation. So on that note, on behalf of Leadership Circle and our featured guest, Greg Gould, I'm Sarah Stahl saying thank you once again for sharing a little bit of your day with us. Take care, and we'll see you next time.